Welcome, everyone. Today, we are excited to have Dr. Margaret Finley, who's a physical therapist and also researcher in the PTRS, that is the Physical Therapy and Rehab Sciences Department. Margaret is an associate, actually, Dr. Finley is an associate professor in the Department of Physical Therapy and Rehab Sciences. She earned a PhD in rehab science from the University of Maryland, which is in Baltimore, Maryland, and Dr. Finley's research has been supported by a VA Rehab Research Service grant through a predoctoral fellowship, and she did her postdoctoral training and subsequent mentorship through a career development award. She has been a principal investigator on a multi-site Department of Defense funded study, and she teaches courses both in the Doctor of Physical Therapy, the DPT, as well as the PhD in Rehab Sciences program. Her research examines the interaction of biological and psychosocial factors in the development and progression of musculoskeletal pain from acute to chronic state, and its impact on activity and participation in individuals with mobility impairments. So, Margaret, we are really excited to have you join us and look forward to hearing about your journey.
So yeah, thank you all for having me. I was joking around to follow the three that have already gone. It was a little daunting in putting this together. So one of the things I thought about was, in Share Your Journey is, well, how did I get here? And this was kind of fun to put this together, to think back, and I watched each of the previous three presentations to see how they approached this and what are some of the things that they did. So I've kind of taken from each of them and thinking about it. One of the things I took about in my journey is that, it's been almost 40 years that I have been doing since that started me on this path. And that was certainly not the year I was born. So it's been a long version of that. And when it came to me for being someone who was, I'm not going to say a child of the 80s, I was a college student of the early 80s. David Byrne jumped to mind when I got here, and everybody knows the song Once in a Lifetime. Well, how did I get here is the theme. And I realized there's numerous lines from that song that fit into my journey. So I'll let you guys bear with me on that one. So I guess the first one is, who am I? And Dr. Kaimal gave me a nice introduction about that. I have been a physical therapist for almost 35 years. I'm a tenured associate professor. These are things I consider myself. I am a rehabilitation research scientist, and she explained earlier what I did. And I explained to people that it's the mitigation of secondary conditions, pain, activity, and participation limitations in people with chronic health conditions. Right now, I currently work with folks with spinal cord injury, but I've worked with other individuals with mobility impairment, manual wheelchair users, individuals with stroke, individuals with transfemoral amputations, which is kind of the odd one out on me. I consider myself to be an advocate for inclusive physical activity across the board. And I'm a mentor to graduate students, both in the PhD and in the Doctor of Physical Therapy. And the last bullet there I think is important is I'm a single mom to a 16-year-old. And most of my journey as an academic researcher has been as a single parent. And I know many times we all stop and sit back and we think, is there someone that's done this? I had a colleague of mine, she was in medical school, but there was no female married professors with families. And she was very discouraged at that. But that's an avenue that I have had to navigate, as everybody has family and different support. So I have been able to this point successfully, due to support and understanding how to find that support, been able to make it through there. So when I talk about how did I get here, to start with where I am today, this 40 years later, I have to say it's unrelenting support and role modeling from my family and my siblings, as well as support from friends. I've heard other people speak about being first generation. I am not first gen. I am a child of privilege. My parents had master's degrees. I'm the youngest of 6 kids with a total of 7 bachelor's degrees, 7 masters, and 4 doctorates. My mother used to say, we just didn't want to get a job. We just wanted to have spring break. So that's why all of us were in school. So I was always supported in an academic journey. Anything that had to do with education, I had full-on family support from parents and siblings, as well as friends and people around me. As was stated, I went to the University of Maryland at College Park for undergrad, and I was pre-med. And my junior year, I had summer jobs, and I had this panicked epiphany in the middle of my junior year that I didn't want to be a physician. I now wanted to be a physical therapist. But at that point, the PT program, also a bachelor's, was in Baltimore at the medical school. And I was already almost 3 years into a program. So through conversation with my parents, they supported and said, let's get you finished a bachelor's and then go on. So I finished my bachelor's in kinesiology, which some places are exercise science, and then went took a 10-day break, and then went into a full-time 2.5-year PT program and finished my physical therapy at the med school in Baltimore. One of the things I noted in several of the presentations were lessons I learned. So I finished my physical therapy education. I was very tunnel visioned throughout it. I talked to people applying to our program, what do you want to do? Well, I was orthopedic sports. That's where I was going. And that's what I did. I went straight to the clinic, and I was in a large private practice, orthopedic and sports medicine, but kind of got itchy after 2 years. And I realized that I like being in school. And so I decided to look at going back for a master's. I was in private practice. I was in, business was growing in the PT world. So I thought about an MBA until I read what the courses were for an MBA. And I hope I don't offend anybody, not me. I read those and I'm like, that's not a fit for me. And so I looked back to the University of Maryland where I was, and I enrolled in their Master's of Arts in Biomechanics. And I worked with, at that time, a very renowned biomechanist named David Kelly. He retired right as I finished. I think Girjia will find this funny that I have a Master's of Arts. It was a thesis option. It was not thesis option, it was thesis required, but their program at the time was in arts. And I am an incredibly left brain person with very little artistic, musical, anything skill. Just ask her. I get very stressed when I'm in her studies. It makes me anxious, but I do have an arts degree. So makes me happy. My dissertation was a very sports biomechanics program. So I was able to take my master's thesis and take it to a clinical perspective. And I even went and did my data collection back up at Baltimore in the PT labs under some assistance with Paul Anderson. And we looked at reaction times and muscle recruitment patterns and hip and ankle strategies with balance perturbation in males after ACL reconstruction 1 year out, and compared them. So one of the things about being in a sports physical therapy program, a sports biomechanics program, is we do a lot of things with instrumentation. And Liz can speak to that biomechanists, we have lots of tools and toys and electronics. And so another one of David Byrne's lines came to me, well, how do I work this? That is a lot of what I learned in my master's. How do I work this equipment and what do I use with it? So you would think in working with all this, I would go straight in and start thinking about the PhD, but I didn't. I continued with private practice. I moved up in administration through our company sold and went to a very large national corporation. And I was moving up in administration. And about that time, gentleman that I know is Don Hobart was at the University of Maryland, and he was our anatomy professor. And he and Paul Anderson had me come and teach summer anatomy. So I was a 40-hour-a-week clinic administrator seeing patients, and added 20 hours a week for the entire summer working in a cadaver lab, teaching PT students. And I fell in love with it. That was their ultimate goal, to get me back there, was to persuade me to go into a PhD. And they would walk around behind me and drop little hints when we were in there working. They brought me in to help teach the orthopedics courses in the fall. And at that point, I had been developing these great relationships in the community. I work with boys and girls clubs, providing lectures and providing support for their kids and the families during the sports. I worked with local high school teams. So at that point, it was a big decision. I left my job as a clinic director and went and did home health so I could research PhD programs. Again, can never just enter something blindly. I had to spend a year doing research. And at that time, there weren't many rehab science programs. Most things were like pure anatomy, bench research. So I interviewed in numerous places, and I ended up at the University of Maryland. You're going to see this big theme here. So here I am starting my now what would be 4th degree from the University of Maryland. So that is definitely one of the big themes on my journey. And I will say one of the most important things, or the best, in the beginning, there were 3 individuals that were doing biomechanics, and I was admitted to the program, and then you selected your mentor. And I worked with 2 of them previously, not directly in research, but they had been my instructors when I was in a PT program. And someone who ended up on my committee, but in another discipline, suggested, why don't you try Mary Rogers? And she was an unknown entity to me. And that was in 1998. And to this day, probably the best decision I have ever made in my academic research career. She is to this day the greatest support to me. She is my, she just points me in the right directions, and I consider her a dear friend as well. One lesson learned there, though, is in that first semester, she sat me down at the end of the first semester and said that I'm not sure this is going to work, because I was defensive to her feedback. I was unaware I was defensive about things that she had said. I guess having been in the clinic for 15 years, I had been a full-time clinician. I was past that point of having people give me that kind of feedback. And it just took her talking to me to realize it. And at that moment, our relationship just took off. And again, to this day. So sometimes listening to the hard things will help you. That was another lesson I learned. So in working with Mary, remember, I left orthopedic and sports medicine. I was working with professional baseball. This is a picture from the Bowie Bay Sox. It's one of the web-based ones. They were directly across the street from my clinic. So I was working with professional baseball and American Legion high-level high school baseball at the time. And I start to work with Mary. I come into this PhD. I was in biomechanics, was my cognate. And this is what Mary's doing. Mary was working with folks who use manual wheelchairs. This is an instrumented ergometer. Right here, there's a load cell, which can get the forces. We were collecting these balls, we're getting kinematics and range of motion. Here we were getting EMG to get muscle activation. And up here, we were collecting, doing max VO2 testing of these individuals on this ergometer and looking at interventions and how it changed. But I kind of stood there like, what am I going to do? I have been ortho sports. Maybe I should have paid more attention in neuro. What am I doing? And we sat down again and we talked. I had 14 years under my belt full-time in the clinic, and I was known to be a shoulder expert. And these people destroy their shoulders. And so from sitting down to something so very different than I'd ever been exposed to, developed into what has become my lifelong research agenda. I was able to take something that I was good at in the clinic and take it to a different population. So my research developed looking at shoulder impairment in manual wheelchairs. It ultimately ended up being my dissertation. And these are a couple pictures from it. I looked at overhead reaching. I looked at transfers. I also looked at wheelchair propulsion on that ergometer. And looked at that as well. And one of the things that Mary was brilliant at identifying and directing me to was funding. As a PhD student, I was very lucky to be very well funded by things outside of the university. Although at that time, the University of Maryland School of Medicine was funding us at a full stipend for the time frame and providing support. So through her direction and guidance, I applied for and received a PODS, which is a predoctoral opportunity scholarship, predoctoral opportunity for doctoral scholars through the Physical Therapy Association. It was when it was early in the program, and it today is still around and is an incredibly prestigious and competitive funding for doctoral students. I was lucky to be one of the early ones, and they still follow you everywhere. I'll put a poster up at some conference and I'll come back to do it, and there'll be a banner that says foundation recipient. So they have tracked our career for a long time. 2 big ones, the International Society of Biomechanics. Mary went on to become the president of that organization. The other thing I learned working with her is in a field that was dominated by males. Mary was one of the original, what I call strong three women. She and two of her closest friends from their Penn State PhD. I got to follow them around and learn from them and how that works. And I applied for an International Society of Biomechanics travel grant, and that took me to Hong Kong and to Sydney, Australia in 2000. I spent 2 months in Hong Kong studying with Raymond Lee. He was originally in Sydney, so I was going to spend all the time there, but he went to Hong Kong instead, back to Hong Kong Polytech. And so I spent 2 months with him there, and we did work and had a research project, which to this day is my most cited paper in working with Raymond there. And then I left and went down to Sydney for the last month, and I was at the University of Queensland. There was a gentleman, an exercise physiologist, doing some work with FES gait in folks with spinal cord injury. So I went and worked with him. And then I went to the Scientific Congress at the Sydney Paralympics in 2000. So I was very lucky with that. And then as my dissertation, the work that I have the pictures of, the ISB also, I applied and was able to get funding, and they helped fund my participants in research for that. The funding that covered my last year was through a predoctoral fellowship through the Rehabilitation Research and Development Service with the VA. And this was the start of my relationship with the VA Research Service, another theme and constant fact in my journey, another avenue of funding that a lot of people don't always look at. And it was very good to me. And I recommend, we have a VA here. I know one of our new faculty is now looking into the VA, into their funding. So very strong service in rehabilitation research. They also have silos of health services research and different areas as well. I fit in the rehab research service. So these pictures are a big part of my journey because they're a big part of me now. Another lesson that I picked up is I worked with professional baseball, but I learned how much I loved working with these athletes in adapted sports. I was working with high-level athletes, ones that were national level and moving on. And I learned that an athlete is an athlete. It does not matter whether they have a spinal cord injury or an amputation. They would come in to see me in the research lab, have me look at their shoulder, and then, I'd give them all these recommendations, and then they'd go, okay, I've got to go to practice now. So much for that recommendation of rest and try this. Serious athletes there. I developed also some wonderful connections. This top picture up here, are the three across the top, are my dear friend Larry Hughes. He was the gold medalist and world record holder in the 96 Paralympics, went on to the 2000 as well. But he was also one of the ones that got me involved in community advocacy for individuals with disabilities and having participation access. Larry started these events for Paralympic field, track and field athletes, shot put, discus, javelin, so that they could come and get their qualifying rounds that are required to become these high-level competitors. So I would go work at those as a physical therapist, also as a researcher, because they were great connections, and I would bring our physical therapy students out there. It's a little daunting when you send someone out in a field and say, hey, mark where this javelin lands or this discus, which is flying at you, because they are pretty tremendous and pretty amazing athletes to see. I've had the privilege of working with wheelchair tennis, basketball, rugby, softball, track and field. And now, thanks to Liz coming on, I've been exposed to rowing, not something that I had worked with. So some great sports there. One important fact about inclusion from Larry that I learned is he's the one that initiated the court battles for Tatiana McFadden when she was in high school to get her access so that she could compete equally in high school with her wheelchair track, with her track athletes. They used to make her compete by herself, just run around the track. So now they let her go out and compete at that time. And now we know she's one of the most decorated Paralympians. She's been to, 5 Paralympics. So advocacy for things that are also supporting my research was something that started to really develop back then. And Larry was pretty instrumental in helping me see that sign. So on other areas that a lesson from Mary, I have my lessons I learned about myself and the lessons I learned from Mary. Mary believed to disseminate and network. So these are a list of the conferences that I went to during my PhD. Again, you'll see I was very privileged to go to lots of wonderful places to be funded. Mary made sure I had funding to get to those. But that first one in 1998, she took me to 1 month before I even started the PhD. I was not a student yet. And she's like, you're coming with me. You need to get involved in this and see what it is. And one of the things Mary would do at every conference, and she still kind of does it to me, is you'll walk into the reception or the happy hour or the business meeting, and she would say, who do you need to meet? Who do you want to meet? And she'd walk me up to this individual because she knew everyone. And within 3 minutes, she was gone. And I was left by myself talking to this person that I idolized because I was reading all their work. I was just fangirling over, and she would just leave me there to learn to have conversations with individuals. I did a little bit to that to Liz at a conference with her, but it was a newer conference to me. And I've done it to Laura at PT conferences. I'm trying to take what I learned and infuse it, not inflict it, infuse it into my PhD students as well. Networking with those individuals at all of those conferences led to, over the years, 10 years later, I would see people at conferences and they knew me, and I was able to build new collaborations, or they were like, hey, I remember what you were doing. I know someone doing it. So that early networking and ongoing network has led to collaborative projects and other aspects of my journey, and is another lesson that I think is very important. Not only don't just go and disseminate, go there and network when you're there. COVID's made that a bit of a challenge in the last year, but I have faith that will come back. So 2 more lines from Once in a Lifetime. You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack and you find yourself in another part of the world. This is Kowloon, Hong Kong. This is where I lived for 2 months. Quite a different place than I had ever experienced. So I learned a lot about myself living there those 2 months. It was a fabulous experience, but a bit daunting. Have to always show off some of I actually took these on cameras that had film that you took to get developed. So these are not from phones. So these were just some pictures from some of the glorious places I went for my PhD. Those are more of a they make me happy. So I added those in. So after the PhD, what came next? Well, University of Maryland's been a theme, and so is the VA. So especially the Baltimore VA, which is where I did my work. The Baltimore VA Research and Rehabilitation Research Service is a very strong research service within the VA. And there's centers within the VA that are developed to do certain areas. And at the VA in Baltimore, they were developing a rehabilitation robotics center. And one of the things that I have learned, and if you get people's CVs and you're like, well, they went to the same place all the time. Well, you're going to see University of Maryland across all of my academics. You don't always need to go to different places to experience opportunities. You just have to have different great people. And I was privileged of that, to sit in Baltimore and have great people come to me and come around me or be introduced to. Again, some of these connections came from Mary's ideas. So I was a postdoctoral fellow, which at the time they called an associate investigator. Now I've been looking at it. That's a different title. That's one of the researchers in the VA now who already has completed their postdoc. But at that time, my postdoc was considered an associate investigator position under Chris Bever. And he is a physician who focused his research on individuals with multiple sclerosis. But he was an expert in clinical trial development. So as they were bringing in the rehabilitation robots in conjunction with MIT and collaboration, he got me involved in that work as it was developing, with the role of doing the biomechanical analyses and outcomes. They were looking at individuals with upper extremity impairment from stroke. And after I finished that postdoctoral fellowship, I applied and I was awarded a career development award. The CDA with the VA is the sister to the K award of NIH, but it's through the VA system. And my primary mentor at that time was Richard Macco, who is a stroke neurologist. And they were building this rehab robotics center. And so they had upper extremity and lower extremity robots. And the Manus is the planar robot that was developed by these two gentlemen, Ego Krebs and Neville Kogan, up at MIT. And so I was working directly with them, both as a postdoc and a career development as well. I went up to MIT for 10 days at a time, several times a year, to do processing in their labs. Another one of the lessons I learned, people at MIT are ridiculously smart. Oh my gosh, it was intimidating as anything. And I interacted with undergraduates to graduate students to postdocs to academic researchers. They are intense and they are incredibly smart. And I also learned that when you're getting feedback on something you've done, they reply to all. So have a thick skin. When you send out an email to 12 people who have contributed and they reply to all with everything you've done wrong, you learn to take mass feedback over and over. So that was one thing. But they've moved on with these robots into work with folks with cerebral palsy. My role in my career development was to look at it from my clinical perspective and let's see if we can take these devices into other populations. And the population of interest was looking into the upper extremity orthopedic impairments postoperatively. I had to basically let these very influential researchers know that their device was not going to go into the orthopedic population. Its impedance was too jerky, and we never could get it under control to where anybody that I worked with that was physical therapist or the orthopedic surgeons felt that it would be safe enough. So we had other work that I was involved with to get papers out and such, the important part during this career development. We also looked at it from a reliability standpoint, but I had to let them know that this wasn't going into the orthopedic population in its current state. It never has moved forward from that. I have not seen it in the orthopedic realm. It sits more in the neurological time. I was also lucky during the career development to be a research assistant professor at the University of Maryland. They are literally across the street from each other. So that's how far I moved from my PhD, is across the street. And I was on an SBIR with Mary. We were both co-investigators with a company out of Seattle, looking at a geared wheelchair wheel. So staying within my wheelchair propulsion background. So keeping that up. This is just an illustration for people that don't know what rehabilitation robotics are. The top three are the planar Manus, and this left one is the linear robot, which got people into different planes of motion. And that's the one they wanted to see would work in orthopedic populations and did not. So over time, as you know, sometimes we have trouble getting papers published that don't have significant findings. Sometimes a no-go is an answer. You know, not finding something that works is an answer itself, and trying to find a way to move forward with that is an important thing, and something that I learned during that time. So my next step, and how did I get where I am now? I left and went to the University of Indianapolis in Indiana. It is a small Methodist college, and I was hired by the Dean of the College of Health Sciences to build a research program. I was given a title of the Director of Research. I was now a tenure track faculty, and I was at a teaching institution that had a grants office that had one person who was a 0.5 FTE, one person, 50% effort. I submitted the first ever NIH submission that university had ever seen. I am highly embarrassed and hoping I never meet anybody that was on the study section that reviewed that R15, because when I look back at it, oh my gosh, it had no mentorship whatsoever. And what a disaster on that one. So with that, teaching institution, our scholarly productivity was solely based and funded on internal grants, because I had no one had dedicated research time. And in an academic PT program, our physical therapy programs, we are required, all faculty, regardless of teaching or research, to have some scholarly productivity. So all of the faculty had to be engaged in some way. And the personnel, we always talk about the challenge of personnel to help you build your research. That's where, we build our labs with PhD students and postdocs who learn skills and help build the program. We only had Doctor of Physical Therapy students. And if you think about being a full-time PhD student, you take 9 credits and that's a full load. PT students take anywhere from 15 to 18 at a time. And they're in class from sometimes 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. Very little free time. So it was a challenge with that. So trying to build a research program, no infrastructure to really support that. And the college wanted to do it as a whole, the university did, but it was more talk than action at that point. So, how to keep moving forward. With that, their big funding was through the Lilly Endowment, and they had these collaborative grants. And don't bother reading all the names of them. I just put them up there. So I had the top 3 are all related and built upon each other. And they were looking at upper extremity impairment in individuals with stroke. I continued working with individuals in stroke when I was there because that was the population that was available. I tried to reach out to the rehab facilities to look at folks with SCI. That collaboration wasn't there. However, another colleague at the university had a good relationship with a variety of organizations working with individuals with stroke. And so we continued on that, looking at upper extremity and moved through these 3 studies. The final one was actually funded at $10,000, which is pretty decent for an internal grant. And it allowed us to submit an R15, much better written. Still only 1 person in that grants office. It was scored twice, was not funded. I left at that point in time, but it was our gaming intervention. The bottom 3 are of interest is because they're looking at prosthetic socket design. So although I am an upper extremity biomechanist who's worked with folks with SCI and stroke, just like I switched from baseball, there was a prosthetist at the VA who wanted to do research on socket design, and he was very, very persuasive and very engaged in it. So we went ahead and we had 3 separate projects. We got presentations, we got some VA collaboration with it, and we were looking at his alteration in socket, and I was doing lower extremity gait. I couldn't talk about it today to save my soul. It was a lot of relearning at that point. But sometimes we can branch out into that strangely different area. So that was something that was of interest, being at this teaching facility. This is just an example of the number of students it takes over the years to get projects done. And so these are a list of them. I'd like to say my pride and joy is the one listed at the top. He went on to get his fellowship as it became an orthopedic board certified physical therapist, and then went on and got his PhD in epidemiology. And now he's a postdoc in Steve George Lab, who is one of my mentors down at Duke. So I feel like of all of those, I got through to 1 to go to the research realm. So nobody else moved into research but him. So I'm just happy I got 1 out of the 25 or 30. At some point, I had pictures of people, and at some point I stopped. So just showing you that there are a lot of people involved. So another avenue at University of Indianapolis, a teaching institution, is there were no PhD programs at the entire university. There were 3 doctoral programs: the Doctor of Physical Therapy, the PsyD, and the Doctor of Health Sciences. We had that program similar to the one that is within our college now. It was for occupational and physical therapists, but these were people that were full-time clinicians or administrators. They were not looking to move up in research. They were looking to move up typically in their academic realm, in their administrative realm. And we were not matched like we are here with research interest. It was pretty much students came in and they were assigned out. So I was the chair to 7 different students over my last 4 years there. And so I have publications and presentations that go from women's health to the foot, and there's a couple that have upper extremity in there. So mainly mentoring students who were not going to go into long-term research to get a reasonable product out of them. One of the bigger issues was there was a lot of variability among the faculty mentors as to what was an appropriate clinical dissertation. I got a reputation of being pretty strict and sticky, and people that got assigned to me had to accept that and know that there was a standard of what I would consider to be reproducible and the rigor that would be accepted, so that what we got was a good product out of that with those students. And we were pretty successful with those 7 students with that. So at UND, I was awarded tenure in 2013, but noting that the criteria are very different than an institution like Drexel. Academic teaching evaluations were number 1. The university motto is education for service. So they were looking at that service line as well. They were less on scholarly productivity. I was very comfortable about that level of what I had. So going into that tenure process, I was quite nervous because of, I taught the courses the PT students didn't love. I taught the research courses. So I came out of there with tenure. One of the lessons that was probably a strong one, which I have to say with a grain of salt, because I know why people go certain places, is going to a primary teaching institution that is developing a research program. Find out a whole lot more before you go there. It took 7 years. I got a lot of stuff done, but I was on a research trajectory that leveled off for 7 years. Nothing, no large funding, no support there. So those are the factors to really consider if you are going to a primarily teaching institution. If your interest is to continue and to become a teacher, that's not a bad thing. But if your goal is research and moving up a scholarly agenda, you may need to ask a lot of questions before you go there. So how did I get here? Here's Drexel at that point. And it basically is what I've heard in the other talks, that what became most evident to me and most important is my family. My entire family was back in the East Coast. I lost both my parents in the time that I was gone. And so my mother passed in November of 13, very unexpectedly. 2 months later, I was at a conference networking, a PT conference, and ran into 2 Drexel faculty at a reception and found out they had an opening. And 5 months later, I was living in Pennsylvania and an associate professor at Drexel. Mary's training had paid off. Find out what's going on at, when you're networking. And I learned that, there's a lot involved with being far from family. So that was very important for me. So I took the big step. I resigned tenure. Everybody works to get that tenure, and I gave it up and started all over. I came to Drexel in September of 2014. I was 11 years post finishing my PhD. I was a single parent. I was now on a tenure clock of, oh my word, what is going to happen if this doesn't work? I came here and I restarted my research agenda. Actually, in a closet somewhere down on our 2nd floor, I came with our gaming devices. UND let them go. They said, yeah, you can have them. They didn't know what to do with them. So my thought was maybe we'd develop the gaming intervention. But when I got here, we're next door to McGee. I made some contacts to find out what's going on within the department with SCI. And that big lesson is McGee. Find a strong community collaborator. McGee has been the best community partner that I have ever experienced. Their willingness to collaborate, their willingness to help when you're in there has been second to none. So a community collaborator is critical. Your mentor and your community collaborator. And make sure you got a grants office in the middle. That's one thing as well. So I came here to restart my research agenda. And so what ended up happening is the first thing was at that time, and I believe Dr. Kaimal, you had one as well. She was a year ahead of me, so I followed in her footsteps through all these little steps. The college had a seed grant to help you get pilot work. It was really, really important for what I did. You're on that 3-year mid-tenure clock. I put in 4 applications to NIH, all not discussed. On a tenure clock, gave up a job, stomach coming up into my chest on a daily basis, not sleeping. Nielsen Foundation, everyone says go there. 3 letters of intent, not a single one invited to full application. So anxiety building, I'm not hitting funding. I've got some decent papers and things coming out from this pilot, but it's really getting nerve-wracking. And then I applied to the DoD, the Department of Defense, and it's through the Spinal Cord Injury Research Program, and that hit. It was a 3-year study. We just finished in July. We had a 1-year NCE. We were going to be given it no matter what, but COVID made it pretty much everyone got one. So being the PI of a multi-site study, biggest lesson, you're always missing something important. You plan this study, you make all these plans, and when you're a good halfway, 2/3 in, you're like, why aren't we looking at this? And you realize all of these things that are really important. You learn so much doing your research about what else you need to learn. And we realized that we should have been collecting all this data. It's in our limitations of every paper. We know we don't have this, this, and this, which we really should. So really think about things and know for a fact that hopefully what you're doing will teach you what else you have to do. We all learned the lesson of COVID. We were collecting clinical data and survey data on folks with spinal cord injury and controls. We were collecting it at 3 data points while they were inpatient, 6 months and 1 year. When folks were hitting their 6th month and they were not available either due to health or transportation, we didn't collect any data. We didn't even bother the surveys. And then COVID hits and we're like, hey, we can collect data remotely. We couldn't do our clinical data, but we could get a large part of it. We actually recaptured people we lost at 6 months at 1 year. So prior to COVID, remote collection would not have crossed our mind. I'm going to be totally honest. Occasionally we would have thought, we can get something on the phone, but you want that person interaction. So COVID let us collect more data than I think we may have been able to. So that was good. The grant ended in July, and we have an invitation-only submission under review. Fingers crossed. And it's our next steps. It is called an expansion grant through the DoD. And we want to find out during community reintegration, how do we develop positive physical activity behaviors and in the process mitigating pain and the psychosocial factors. So this grant is leading to others. Good news is during COVID, that was a good COVID thing. I was awarded tenure in 2020. So I started sleeping again a little bit. So that stress went down. Currently, I am mentoring 2 PhD students. Liz is with us today. One thing is Liz, I do not believe had worked much in adapted sports, but she's an adapted rower. So she has taken her areas of expertise with exercise physiology and rowing, and she's now doing something very novel and looking at adapted rowers and also helping to build an elite adapted rowing team out of Boathouse Row. Laura is in her 3rd year and she's a PT, and she's looking at adapted exercise in the community, and she's building off of the psychosocial aspects. She has experience in community-based exercise. So she's in people with chronic health conditions. So she's building off of that. So hopefully I am passing on some of the mentoring tricks that I learned from Mary and some of the other aspects onto them. Right now, we're really in the hardcore learning that rejection thing as papers. Everybody's putting in papers and everything's bouncing back. We're all getting that because COVID gave everybody time to write and everybody's overwhelmed and we're all getting tossed. So hopefully some of that is being built. A couple other opportunities. look through your university and see what do they have to help you build. Drexel has a unique career development award. Also followed Dr. Kaimal on that one, to build mentorship relationships outside of Drexel. And that's where I built the one with Steve George down at at Duke. I went out to Iowa and worked with a woman who does quantitative sensory testing, and brought in Rick Shields, who is world-renowned PT SCI researcher. So that one helped build relationships. We have the Implementation Science Accelerator Grant. That one is providing pilot data for an application that's in now, two applications actually that are in now, and hopefully to have others, as well as the Cell to Society feasibility study. We have, this week is our last week of intervention. So internal funding has helped very much so for us. So if you don't have that external funding, sometimes internal can help you build. Within that, I have pending these three applications. One of them, the RO1, is as a co-investigator through a collaboration with folks at Jefferson. So we'll see what happens with that one as it's under review. And, you know, I keep bouncing back and forth to this once in a lifetime. I got to this one, it's like into the blue again after the money's gone. That's where I'm sitting right now. I'm into the blue. I've got only internal, my external money is not there. So I got to keep pushing forward. And just to give you guys a few extra lines of, and to properly cite David Byrne and his colleagues for my, you know, how did I get here kind of situation. We just have to go with things as they come at us and find the best way to work through them. I always have to show that I am a diehard Maryland fan, no matter what. They've spent enough of my life. And this is the one that sits where I am right now, where I've taken my biomechanics work. I like to say, I feel like I'm blasphemous to the biomechanist in me, because I'm kind of leaving the biomechanics behind. I think some of it's important, but I think we can only be so precise with these individuals, and having community inclusion is at times more important than having the perfect wheelchair propulsion. So that is where I stand now, and that is my journey. Ooh, that was long, sorry.
That was amazing. That was truly amazing. And I will say you have to take back the I am not an artist claim, because your slides were beautiful, your presentation, the analogies. Um, I will keep working on convincing you that you are. Okay. So I have a few questions, comments. I'll just say a few things and then we'll open it up for everyone. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that you shared, Margaret. You know, I know you're an extraordinary mentor and you think really deeply about your mentorship role and how you support Laura and Liz and other students. And it was really great to see how you identified that in your own mentors and how you're sort of continuing that in your own work. You know, there's a whole tradition going on here. I know you introduced me to the Paralympics in a serious way. And I mean, I've started watching it after, you know, reading of your work and seeing your work. And it's so interesting at the, you know, the integration of athleticism and adaptive devices and adaptive tools. It's so very interesting, you know, how far we can take the body and how we understand it. Thank you also for sharing your journey and sort of restarting and the intersection of our personal and professional choices. And you all should know Margaret really helped me with the DoD grant. She's incredibly generous. And I wouldn't have gotten mine if you hadn't shared all your documents and supporting materials. So you're very much a leader on all DoD and VA funding for us. So thank you for your
I hope it continues. Need another one.
Yep. And it's coming. I know. And you know, you wait and see. Now everything will come at you. And then you'll be like, oh my God, how do I manage this?
Hopefully.
Yeah. So I'm just really, really grateful for you know, all that you bring. And thank you for
Thank you.
doing this today. So um, if anyone has any questions, we have about 8 minutes more.
I do have a question. Margaret, thanks so much. It's
Sure.
wonderful that you were able to start the tenure process again and go through the whole thing. It's for most people, it's nerve-wracking to even think that. Especially, if you're stepping off the ledge, you want to make sure there is another rock there. But I was curious towards the end, because you said at some point you realize we can only go so far with biomechanics, and then we have to think about the people first. Is that more of a realization of a flawed trajectory of science, or did you think that this is where you excelled well and that's for somebody else? And what was that dynamic that made you choose that?
I'm gonna, part of it is my professional clinical opinion, but the other side of it, there's still a lot of, I did wheelchair propulsion biomechanics. There's this thought of, and we do it when we fit people for wheelchairs, that there's an ideal propulsion that will help diminish or mitigate the development of wrist, shoulder, and elbow problems. And we do that in a pretty hospital and another setting. And I have always worked both Baltimore and here, very urban environments, and people don't have either they don't get the best wheelchair because of their insurance coverage and their life, or they don't live in an environment that's a perfectly flat tiled floor. They're pushing around a facility with thick carpet, or they're pushing up and down our streets here. So we can make them look beautiful in a lab, but how do we carry that over outside of a lab or a clinic? So I've become very aware of that. Yeah, there are the best ways, but that's not real world. People don't live in that environment. And so many people don't have the resources for that. And I started to realize that, okay, what else can we mitigate? And that was what this last grant was. What are the clinical factors as well as psychosocial factors that are leading to the perpetuation of pain and pain interference? And from this, we started to look at, there's pain and there's pain interference that are limiting people as they're getting into the community to engage fully in recreation, whether that is in going to their community church, going to a support group, or going to work out. And how can we provide avenues for that, both from an intervention phase, whether it's the psychological factors, the social factors, or physical factors, providing opportunities to engage in an environment. So I have just taken my professional opinion is, yes, there is an ideal, but people can't do that every day, all day in their environments. Not everyone can. So we need to find a different direction. And so that's where I have gone with it. We had biomechanical assessments in the last grant, but we faded them out. They didn't provide us useful information for real world, for real life application.
Yeah, thanks.
That's a great point, sort of shifting the natural shifting of what excites you, right? So what excited you 20 or 25 years ago is different from what excited you now, and that's okay too. So,
and Liz's work is very biomechanical, and those kind of things, I really, really enjoy them. And we're trying to find out, why is this rowing helping to mitigate shoulder pain? And so we have to do it from a mechanistic approach to start. And then it's, how do we get these people rowing once we show it's a great thing? And so first step is show that this is the way to go, and then why, and then we got to get people there.
Yep. Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question.
I do have a question, but I got to clear it by the moderator though.
What is it? Go for it.
I don't want to step on anybody else. If they have a question, go. You let me know if I want to pose this question. It is a share your journey. So it just struck me that it's so interesting where you've gotten so far. And now that COVID has influenced our research patterns so much, I just want to start posing this question moving forward. Like, what do you see as the next few steps, or what what has awakened or what can give other people kind of an inspiration to like try this step, or if that's not been taken?
It's, one thing we've learned is we can collect data remotely. We can't get our clinical hands-on data. We can't get that, but we can get survey data. We can get pain and pain interference data. We're completing Thursday at a virtually run intervention that is done live. It's an accessible, adapted, individualized group exercise program. Laura's actually leading it. It's co-led with an individual with lived experience of spinal cord injury, which is something else we have learned and we have added fully to every one of our studies. We have what we call the SCI LEAP, Spinal Cord Injury Lived Experience Advisory Panel. And it's 6 individuals who have spinal cord injury. They're different ages, different mechanisms, different duration of injury. They are on all of our grants and provide input. And they help us with they will be helping with data collection. They currently are in this pilot. They're helping run it. So that it got to a point, I was at a conference for folks, SCI researchers, and there was a community group that was there, and when they would get up to the microphone, you could tell it was going to get belligerent, because they're like, you guys have been doing this research for 25 years and you're not doing anything that helps us. That is not what we need. That is not what we want. And I heard that loud and clear. Now, DoD requires at least one person now on certain grants. I have brought this panel because I don't think one person's lived experience is representative. And that's very clear with this group of 7 that we have. So we are now, that's another thing we've learned, is bringing in the population that you're studying as stakeholders in it and actual co-investigators. And they're consultants for us so that we don't have to go through all the other grant paperwork for them as co-Is. But we can deliver these things, and we're asking what they want. And so we started this study, and within 4 days we had our enrollment and we were ready to go. People wanted to be involved in this. We thought people were sick of virtual, but it got hot outside and they wanted to exercise. They wanted to engage with other people while they were doing it and share ideas with folks with SCI, learn from an exercise expert, which is Laura. So we've learned that from them, and that's a direction that we are going. That's our grant. Girjia's on 2 of them with us that are out there that are going to be looking at this from pain. Those accelerometers, Arun, those are our next step with it. So.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, the patient advocate piece is the insistence on patient advocates on grant proposals is an excellent development and really pushes everyone to think about application and what this means.
Absolutely.
So you'll see more and more of that. We are at 2 p.m. So we'll wrap up now. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email Margaret. I'll bring you up. And thank you so much. This was really great to hear and ever inspiring. So thank you so much, Margaret.
And intimidating to follow the previous 3. And yeah, thank you for having me. Like I said, it was fun to trace back what did I do after I watched everybody else's to say, hey, how did I get here? And I have in a half hour, I return to the classroom after 18 months.
I'll see you at 3:30.
Yes, you will.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you at our next postdoc gathering. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to me, folks.
Inspirational.
Bye.